Live peeps. Thank you for keeping up with the conversation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for following us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Not there yet, but I'll get there. LinkedIn. And before I get started, we're doing a live broadcast Friday from Seattle, downtown, T-Mobile Park, Tony T's. We're going to be interviewing a few people, one of the best mural artists in the Seattle area. If you've ever been to Seattle and see some of the utility boxes and the pictures, he's the guy that does those. And we're going to be talking with him live at Tony T's in Seattle for Blue Friday celebration, which is a Seahawks kind of unofficial holiday. Hey, I want to share a little bit about this thing called pivot. And you hear a lot about it in culture right now. People talk about you got to pivot, you got to shift, you got to make a move. And it sounds cool until you don't know how to do it. It's kind of like learning a new dance and you think you know how to do the dance and you get out there and you do not know the moves of the dance. There used to be the dance called the electric slide. I'm kind of dating myself, but the electric slide, you had a group of people to get out there and then you had to know how to move to the left, to the right? You had to know how to make, the moves. And there was always somebody that wanted to do the electric slide, but then they would get on the group or get on the floor and they would be off as two left shoes. And then they would throw everybody else off, right? So sometimes when you're trying to use a word and you're trying to sound cool, you can throw things off. You can throw yourself off. You can throw a team off. You can throw people off. So pivot is one of those words. And Malcolm Gladwell, best-selling author, 10,000 Hours to Greatness, talk about pivot as being is a way to set up an issue comes at you one way, and then you flip it around, okay? I'm short, but that means I move quicker, okay? I'm taller, that means I can see better. So I'm flipping, you flip the script. When I was growing up in school, kids would identify your weakness and speak to you about your weakness. You slow. You're ugly, you're short. And kids tend to do that, right? And we didn't know how to pivot. And so instead of pivoting or shifting, we get a complex. You got a big nose. Oh, I don't know how to pivot off of that, right? I can smell better. I'm older now, so I know how to pivot much better. But pivot is when you get caught in an issue and you need to flip that around. You need to get out of that and move that in a different direction. And we've seen that with COVID. Gary Keller, chairman of Keller Williams, came out in March 22 and said, hey, we got to pivot. We got to shift. Prior to that, he came out and said, we are now a technology company in 2018. We got to pivot. So Gary Keller has been kind of a champion of pivot from someone that has profile, on an international basis. But you can use pivot in everyday life. You can use pivot as a parent. You can use pivot as a spouse, as a partner. You can use pivot in a lot of different ways. I have become a master of pivoting, okay? I love pivoting because I don't like getting trapped into situations that I don't want to go down the road. So number one is understand your position when you get into a conversation with people. Sometimes people will throw a question at you you're not expecting to hear. And I've learned that because somebody throws a question at me that I don't want to answer, then I don't have to answer it. As I always say, just because my phone rings does not mean I have to answer it. It just means it rang. So if you ask me a question I don't want to answer, usually number one is I answer you with a question. Interesting that you asked me that. Why did you ask me that? What are you curious about? What are you trying to know? Right. So one of the questions you often see people say, what do you do for a living? What do you do for work? Then I will flip the script. Well, what do you do? Share with me what you do. I'll share with you what I do, because I don't want to necessarily be defined by what I do. Because sometimes when people ask that question, it's a setup. Because they're trying to determine sometimes your economic status. Sometimes they're trying to determine your credibility. I don't know what they're trying to determine, but I'm going to flip the script back on them and say, well, tell me about that, right? Another opposite way is if you have a disability or you have a bad thing happen to your life. You go through a divorce, okay? Now you got to pivot, right? Okay, I was married for X amount of years and now I'm single again. Now I've got to pivot, right? What's my pivot? Well, my pivot is I get to reset my life. I get to do some things maybe that I was not able to do. I get to become a better person. That's your pivot. Instead of becoming down, depressed, you know, and negative like a lot of people do, hating on your ex, and that's not really helping. That's not a pivot. Sometimes you are born with some type of disability. One of my best stories of somebody was born with a disability that has pivoted is Stevie Wonder. Great artists like Ray Charles, they were born blind and they had to pivot. They couldn't just become a victim to that disability. Sometimes we have children that have dyslexia. We have to pivot on how that child is taught, right? So the situation is set up one way. I got a child with dyslexia. Now I got to pivot, right? And that pivot has to be something that you believe in, that you're passionate about, not necessarily what medical professionals tell you or what the government tells you. You got to take all that information and say, this is how I want to pivot and go there. I had challenges in my health and I needed to decide, do I just accept it the way it is and compensate for, my structural system deteriorating, blood pressure going up due to stress? Or do I pivot and go and find some ways to reverse the curve, turn back the clock and push the thing back? And that's a pivot, right? Because you have to change direction. So a pivot really is about changing directions, right? I'm changing direction. And when I change directions, I'm making decisions consistent with the direction that I'm going in, not the direction that I've been. Right. So that's number two is you got pivoting is about changing directions. You heard the old saying, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to keep getting what you get. Habit insanity. We've talked about that. And yet people do it all the time. Right. I shouldn't smoke, but you keep smoking. I shouldn't go to Krispy Kreme, but you keep going. I shouldn't drink, but you keep drinking. Okay. So you're not reversing the curve. You're not pivoting if you keep doing the same thing and rationalizing what you're doing. The difference between a pivot and the other thing I call the spin, because a lot of people will spin situations. Politicians spin situations. So they're trying to turn a negative into a positive. I did not lie. I just misstated the fact. No, you lied. Okay, you're trying to pivot so you don't look like you are wrong. I wasn't late. I just didn't have the right time. No, you're late. So that's a spin. And people tend to push back on spin. So, try not to be a spinner, right? You want to be a pivoter. I want to move the conversation if I'm a salesperson and a customer or client is getting me back into a corner, I need to pivot out of that so that I can save the relationship, keep the thing moving, but don't get stuck. Don't get stuck. Don't get stuck. Don't get stuck. A lot of times people get stuck. Pivoting, really, one of the best examples of pivoting really comes out of sports, and that's the NBA. When a player goes down and they stop, they have what they have called a pivot foot. And that pivot foot will allow them to turn a different direction, move the ball in a different direction, pass the ball in a certain direction, right? That the other player can't get it. As long as they don't pick up the pivot foot, they're fine. But it allows them to change directions. So that's all it does is a pivot allows you to change direction. What area do you need to change direction in? Is it in your finances? It is in your relationships. It is in your health. Don't just settle for doing the same thing over and over again. I always joke about rinse and repeat, but it ain't fun when you're stuck into something. It's fun when you got consistency. Rinse and repeat is awesome, but rinse and repeat is not good if you're stuck in the wrong kind of situations. And I just feel a sense of confusion and pressure and division going on because of world events, the pandemic, vaccine, politics, and you get yourself caught up in it and you can become paralyzed. Your own family problems, your own personal health problems, and someplace you got to figure out, okay, I need to pivot away from this. I need to move away from this person. I need to move away from this place. I need to pivot. I need to change direction. Now, I'm not saying go home and say, I'm divorcing you because I need to pivot. I'm not, don't say Lewis Howard told you that, but don't quit your job because I need to pivot. But you might need to change positions within the company, right? You might, that's what I'm doing. One of my companies, I'm not leaving the organization, but I'm pivoting and I'm changing directions. Okay. So just want to give you those thoughts. Really think about the pivot. Think about a move that you need to make in your life, that you need to go in a different direction as it relates to people, places, and things. Hey, this is Lewis Howard. I love to inspire people. I'll see you on another edition of Lewis Howard Live, inspirational recipes for the soul.